I get mad of Shabbos.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Around the Shabbos Table. It is wonderful to be back. I'm Ahron Wohlgelernter, and this is my father, the father, a.k.a. Rabbi Wohlgelernter. I think it goes the opposite. It's Rabbi Wohlgelernter, a.k.a. the father. Anyhow, it's very good to be back. And I'm going to hit you right away here today with a story. I love stories. Although I'm not a story person, I don't think in stories. But I don't know, do you think in stories? Like, oh, there's a story. Uncle Shuey thinks in stories.
Right.
He sees something, he says, one time, and he tells you a story with that.
Right.
Certain people do that. I don't think in stories. Stories don't.
In Mishalim.
Okay, you think in Mashalim?
Yeah.
I think in ideas, a concept. So like a Gemara, I'm not going to remember because of its story. I'm going to remember it, or I'm going to remember because of what the daf represents. It represents, like, I go through Tainus. We were learning Tainus. I go through Tainus and I say, the first is Tefillah, and then you have Geshem, and then you have Tainus itself, and then you have concepts, and then things fit in. That's how I think. I don't think in stories, but I do think stories do show you a certain amount of concepts, and they project concepts without meaning to, and they're hidden there, and not everyone is awake to what are the concepts behind these stories. So we say a beautiful story, and then the person who tells us the story, the Rabbi Krohn who tells the story, decides which message he wants us to take from it, but there's 10 other messages that are there that we need to take as well. So that's why I'm in this story thing. So I'll hit you with a story, and I'll hit you guys with the story that I've always grown up with, I've always heard, and I'm sure you have too, and try to take it in a direction where I think there are certain messages that are being hidden there that we don't necessarily deal with. So there was and ding, here's the story. There was a famous Rev in the Rechavi area of Yerushalayim who had a yeshiva called Netzach Yisrael, and this was Rav Gustman. And Rav Gustman, one day, one of his Talmidim saw him outside watering the flowers. Again, this is a Rosh Yeshiva. This is a Chashav Talmud Chacham outside of his beautiful garden outside the shul. And he was outside the shul there watering. So the Talmud asked him, Rabbi, what's going on? Why are you doing this? And the Rosh Yeshiva of Gustman tells him a story. This is what happened. Rav Gustman was in Europe at the beginning of before World War II, before the Holocaust, and at a very young age became a dayan. I think he was a dayan for Rav Gustman. For Rav Chaim Moser. Chaim Moser Grudzinski. And he sat on his bezdin, and at a very young age was recognized as a big Talmid Chacham. And he was very close to Rav Chaim Moser. And Rav Chaim Moser was the Gadol Hadar at the time, and took care of Rav Gustman. So one day, Rav Chaim Moser and his student Rav Gustman were walking in the forest, and they were talking and learning. And out of nowhere, seemingly, Rav Chaim Moser points to a cave. He says, "This cave, you'd be able to hide in it." And he points to some flowers. And he says, "These ones, you can't eat these. These are poisonous." And he points to a leaf. This leaf, it could sustain you for X amount of time. And this. And he went through all the things they saw on their walk through the forest, and he showed him. And years later, when Rav Gustman finally was able to escape from the concentration camps, survived as a fighter and a partisan in the forest, and him and his group survived on this knowledge that Reb Chaim Moser gave him. And they survived in this cave, and they survived on these foods and these berries and not these leaves. And says Rav Gustman to his Talmud, "I have tremendous amount of akar satov to these leaves that they saved my life. That the way I show my akar satov is by feeding, is by pouring and watering them." So I don't know about you, but I definitely always heard this story with regards to akar satov. That it's not enough just to say thank you, but you have to live thank you. And one must almost do an action that shows your hakaras hatov, be it to the Rebbe Shalom, be it to eitzim ve'avanim, be it to inanimate objects, but you have to show that hakaras hatov.
That's just to stop here for a second. The real appreciation comes only from the way that you treat things. Because you can say thank you, but that doesn't mean that you're really appreciative of something. Saying thank you is not appreciation. Appreciation is that with the things that you've given me or the advantage that I've just gotten, I use that in the correct kind of way. So when you give your kid a toy and the kid uses it to whack their brother, right? So then that's not...
What's your mushal is always the...
my mushal...
The crystal glass that the guy puts under the... You give him a crystal glass and he puts it to hold up his table.
Very expensive crystal glass.
Right, and his table was wobbly, so he puts it underneath. You come back, you see... So it's very nice. You can say thank you all he wants, but at the end of the day, he's not appreciating, evaluating the item.
And then it turns to us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a life, and we say thank you for life. But we use our lives for ridiculous things, so it shows that inherently we don't appreciate it. So the fact that Rav Gustman was sitting there and watering plants, that was his greatest way, rather than making a Suda Sadah and serving the plants. It's like, rather than doing that or speaking about how important plants are because they saved my life, but actually taking care of them shows that you appreciate them. It's not just words, you really appreciate them. And I think that's, if I were to use this story in Hakaras HaTov, he would be an amazing example of that kind of Hakaras HaTov, where you show that you understand the value of them. And the way you understand the value of them is by watering them and nurturing them.
Right. And that was this launches into the conversation about Moshe Rabbeinu and Hakaras HaTov, that Moshe didn't hit the Nile, right? That just, it brings up all these conversations which we know and love and are important. But I think hidden in this story is an interesting conversation and an interesting topic or in concept here, that we sort of run over, because we have to paint the picture. Reb Chaim Ozer was the Gadol Hadar, the Torah leader. He was not the leader in botanical sciences, correct? But yet he knew to the extent of what's poisonous and what's not. He didn't just know what smells good, what looks good, what is nice and what cuts nice on your wedding table. He understood the depth, and he understood really the science of it. And I think that there's the concept or a topic here of that has to answer the question of why.
Why did he know?
Why did he know this? And second is, whatever he knew that he knew, why did he teach it to him? And why did he teach it to Rav Gustman?
Why did he feel it was important enough information that Rav Gustman needed to have that information?
Right.
Even if he came by the information, however he came by it, but why was he imparting that information to Rav Gustman?
Those are the questions that I just don't think are asked. You read the story in Hebrew and English and everything. You just read the story, and it's missing that for me. And I think there lies a concept that needs to be broken open. So we could start either way. And so I'll push your buttons on this one, and I'll say, why did he why did he feel it was important to learn this? Did he study it? Where did he know this from?
Okay, so before we go there, I want to take one approach to this and then take it off the table, because I don't want it to keep beating us up. And that is that the Rav Gustman had some kind of Ruach HaKodesh. He knew that Rav Chaim said that Rav Gustman was going to need this, and therefore he taught him that information.
Right, he smelled the war coming, and he saw, and he knew, and he
and I firmly believe that, but believe that with everything, because we're supposed to believe this, that nothing happens to us. No, there's no such thing as a random meeting and a random meeting people. You met this guy yesterday who laughed when you told him what your name was. Okay, you're going to find out, and it could be you're going to find out within the next, within the next 90 years, or you're going to have to wait until you get to the other Emes. But you're going to find out why you met that person, and that wasn't random. It was important. It was important for him, perhaps. It was important for you, whatever it was. But there was an importance to it. And therefore, nothing happens random. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running an incredible world. People say when you scratch the surface and you say, "Whoa, I know that person." I know, wow, it's such a small world. So somebody once corrected me and said, "It's not a small world. It's actually a massive world. The world is so deep and so big, but it's so incredibly well run."
Right.
It's a beautiful, beautiful way to look at it. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I mean,
Of course you know this person, right?
That we believe in fundamentally. That the Reb Chaim Ozer got this information because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted Reb Chaim Ozer to have this, because he knew that in the future Rav Gustman was going to need this information. So he set that whole thing up. No question about it. Now that we know that we're religious, now let's take that and put that away. Because that's not what this discussion is really about.
I don't think you need to look at that story and stop there.
That is correct.
That is true.
I agree on that. Yeah.
That's true, because we're people of faith, and I'm a man of faith, and I believe that nothing happens in this world without the Rebbeinu Shalom being involved, and everything the Rebbeinu Shalom does, l'tav of it, is good. I do believe that, and I firmly believe when you look at this story, that is what you see. I agree with you, but I think it's faulty to just stop there, because how do you apply that to your own life? Then you say you're in the middle of learning, and something comes up that, I don't know, maybe you're not out and walking in the thing, but a piece of wood comes and you understand that wood, you know it, and you have to teach your chavrusa so that he doesn't hurt himself, and then whatever the situation is, and then you don't do it because no, if the Russian wanted it, he would force me to do it. You can't wait for those moments. Every moment is that moment, and when you make a choice to do X, Y, and Z, that's the Ribono Shel Olam being Sibos Kol Sibot. He's making everything happen for you. But if you're always waiting for that moment, the Ribono Shel Olam wants me to become a scientist, he'll force me to be a scientist. I don't need to go to school. He'll force. Maybe you do need. Only you know the answer to those decisions, and you have to make decisions. This doesn't absolve us of our responsibility to now make decisions, because Reb Chaim Ozer had Ruach HaKodesh, and he knew that the Ribono Shel Olam wanted him to do that.
Right. So the Ruach HaKodesh thing, I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I don't know why we have to say the Ruach HaKodesh, and that doesn't add to or take away from the hashgacha of the story. Right. But I think you have to look at it come to a very human side, and say, why did this great rabbi? They say about Rabbi Chaim Ozer that he davened a very short Shemona Esrei, and the reason that he davened a very short Shemona Esrei is because there was a vein on his head that bulged. And the reason that vein bulged when he davened is because they say that he had the ability, he was ambidextrous, he had the ability to be able to write two different things at the same time. With complex Torah thoughts, right? Correct. Two complex Torah thoughts. He was able to carry on a conversation, and he was able to read and comprehend something, all of that being done at exactly the same time. So for him to concentrate, to take all the parts of his head and to concentrate them together, to have kavanah when he was davening was so difficult, and it required so much energy that he ended up he had to daven a short Shemona Esrei because, like I said, his vein was bulging, and therefore he had to do it in a quick. He couldn't hold on to that for such a long time. Okay, so this is the Reb Chaim Ozer we're talking about. He was Kulei Torah. He was an Isha Torah. He was an Ish Ha'am. He took care of the nation. He was involved, I think, in Gush Yisrael, in gathering together Rabbanim, and he was a Managador. Managador sitting there looking and going, oh, that's a Russian iris, and that it seems weird. Forget about what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted. How did he get motivated? Is really what you're asking. How did he get motivated on a human level to think that was important? Okay, so I would venture to say that when we look at Gedolim, not at the exclusion of others, but there's some that stand out. We were discussing Rav Heinemann, right? Rav Heinemann who knows so much about the technical world, and when he paskins on technical things, it's because he's studied them. He's looked into them on a technical level, not only just asked experts about it. He's mastered them. He's mastered them. That's right. So the whole Shabbos mode
break it up and just tell us Rabbi Heinemann. Tell us the Shabbos. I'm not familiar super with the Shabbos mode issue on ovens.
Yeah, there was. Forget about the whole Shabbos stuff that we figured out, but it's how to integrate that with all the technology. And Rabbi Heinemann learned all that technology, and that's why there was a vikuach about it. There were rabbanim that didn't like it, and they were going up against the guy who knew not just the halacha based off of a technical theoretical knowledge. He was coming off of a very practical knowledge.
Right. He doesn't approach it as if A does what it says it does and B does what it says it does, then it should be aser or mutter.
Right.
He knows by the time he paskins, Rav Heinemann knows that A does A and B does B, and the combination of A and B is mutter or aser.
Right.
He's not always looking to be matter things. That's not what we're saying, but he's able to understand and master each component of what needs to be mastered and say it over and give a psak on it.
There's a difference between based on the information that I've been given or based on how I understand.
How I understand.
Two different approaches. And there are many poskim, many giant poskim, who we put our lives into their hands, but their approach was more of
based on the information I was given.
Based on the information I was given. And the best of those poskim recognized that their information might be limited, but this is what they were given. And some of those piskei halacha changed as more information was given to them, and they recognize it. But there are those poskim, and I think Rabbi Heinemann is a good example of them, not an exclusive, but a good example of poskim that they themselves.
I think Rabbi Belsky was also
very much that way. Very much that way.
We've already answered the question because here we've said that they have an interest in these things. I mean, if Rabbi Heinemann, the greatest question is if Rabbi Heinemann wasn't the posek that he was and the manig of the maverick and halacha that he is, what would he be?
I don't know, but he could have been a car mechanic and he could have been an electrician.
And he could have been a farmer.
Right. The reason I say that is because I saw with my own eyes, as I was telling you, that when he lived on Yeshiva Lane in Baltimore, he would take, there were times where he would take his car and bring it in sort of into the living room through sliding doors and work on his car there when it was raining. He would also figure out how to place lights in a way that the light was maximized and that he could use the least amount of electricity and get the maximum amount of light. So he used that was all technical knowledge, and he never, I don't believe he ever stepped foot in a college, or in even a technical course.
It was his interest. It was interest driven, right?
Right. So what
curiosity driven.
So without interviewing him, I would say, and I would say this about many, that it was their interest. Sometimes it started even before their interest in halacha. Those they just had a curiosity of the world. But I think that
and then only then realized where it intersects with halacha. Right?
But there's also the possibility that there is just that there is just a curiosity of the world and how the world works, and then eventually the two things intersected.
And he fed that curiosity by channeling it towards halacha and towards Torah. But he didn't squash it because it has to do with mili da'alma, with things outside of his 4x4 space of halacha, right? Right. He just widened his 4x4 space to include and to really understand. I remember Rabbi Heinemann coming into yeshiva with strawberries and toothpicks and toothbrushes to figure out. So they say there's bugs in strawberries. Let's figure it out. And what came out from there was Rabbi Heinemann sat down, figured out how many bugs, what bugs, where they are, where you could find them, and came up with a unique psak for the star K with regards to strawberries. Because he really understood strawberries, and he got down into the weeds with them. Same thing with shavers. He understood we're at the big rage of lift and cut shavers. What's a lift and cut? That it gets so close to your face that it cuts. He understood and sort of disproved that fake marketing, that it doesn't really do what it says it does, because he sat down with hairs and he sat down with different sizes of hairs and different thicknesses, and he really sat down and figured out if these shavers do. Regardless of, is this the only way to paskin halacha? That's not the question here. But the question is, why? And the answer is, because this is how he understood. He has a curiosity and interest to use his hands to figure things out, and he feeds that curiosity by channeling it towards his halacha.
Right, and like in everything, I don't know this. I'm going to now stop talking about Rabbi Heinemann, but a posek that is an expert in flavors, right, and in the technology of flavors, might not necessarily be an expert in some of the other technology. I'm just talking about, let's say, in food, but into other things. Their curiosity leads them to a certain place. And I think that the thing to sort of be madgish here is that their curiosity leads them to a place and they're not afraid to go to that place, right? And it's not because of that it's secular knowledge. They see it strictly as Torah knowledge, as knows that this knowledge of how a light works, this knowledge of how electricity works, that is Torah, because Torah has to be applied to it. So it's not secular. Now, to understand it on a theoretical, intellectual way, that might not be that to them might not be necessary if they can get all their knowledge from a very practical way. So it doesn't mean, oh, you see, this is their stance on secular knowledge in general. It's not. It's their stance on practical things, on the world and the way the world works. It's a practical, not theoretical attraction, because at the end of the day, they see it as Torah. And when you go back to Reb Chaim Oizer saw flowers as part of Torah. And he saw this was, and I don't know what other things he was interested in also, but certainly in this kind of stuff, he was interested because this is something that was...
We don't know. We only know this one story. And because of its hashgacha prates wow factor, we know the story.
Right.
But who knows? Maybe he also took his car into his living room in Yeshiva Lane. Right. Like, we just don't know. Right? There were no cars. But
right. So I'm comfortable saying this, that this was not a satisfying an urge for secular knowledge, or a statement about the importance of secular knowledge, because there was no importance to secular knowledge other than what it has to do with Torah. Not that the knowledge itself has some kind of value. So those systems that put value on secular knowledge can't use Reb Chaim Oizer or Rabbi Heinemann or Rabbi Asher Weiss or any of these kinds of poskim,
or the Nitziv,
or the Nitziv, or the Gro's understanding of math. Right? They can't use any of them as their poster child, because their desire for that knowledge was a very different. It was because of the Niflos Habori. It was because of the wonders of God's world, and it was understanding the wonders of God's world. It's not the same as Shamshon Fal Hirsch saying that he needs to see the Alps, because when he gets up there after 120, Kodesh Baruch Hu say to him, I heard the story that he said that Kodesh Baruch Hu say to him, Shimshon, did you see the Alps? And what am I going to say to the Rebbeinu Shalom? Do you see my beautiful Alps? This is what I'm going to say to the Rebbeinu Shalom. And that's why he had a real desire to go and to see the Alps, because it's part of the Bria, and therefore he wanted to appreciate the Bria in a better way. It was a religious thing, not a secular thing, which we then used. Right. Similar to the thing I was saying to you before. I'm not going to go into it, but similar thing I was saying to you before about the difference between Kol Man Da'av Rachmana and Gamzul Tova. That are you seeing this as a vehicle which takes you somewhere, or do you look at it itself? This is Yaakov and Esav, right? This was Yaakov and Yisrael. That Yaakov and Yisrael, we've heard it explained 2 levels of the approach to the physical world. So the simple approach is that the physical world is there and it's something. It's a shame davar, and you have to take it and now elevate it. You make a bracha on it, you use it for mitzvah, you take it and you elevate it. And then the higher approach to that is that its whole purpose is for ruchnius. In other words, it is a davar ruchnius, not a davar gashmi. It has a physical form, but it's by definition it's there as a davar ruchni.
By the way, this is
the Chassidus Shemaisa of the Rebbe that says that he turns to the Chassid and he says the Chassid says to him, Rebbe, we're the same. He says, you pick up an apple, you make a bracha, you eat the apple. So the Rebbe says to him, no, we're completely different. He says, you're hungry, you pick up an apple, and therefore you have to make a bracha. He says, I need to make a bracha, so I pick up an apple so I can make a bracha to Rebbeinu Shalom. And I think that's exactly what we're trying to say, is that was what was driving Reb Chaim Oizer. It wasn't the let's take the physical world and elevate the physical world. The physical world is ruchnius, and it's part of our ruchnius, and therefore we have to look at it in that way.
And that's why he knew it, and that's why he taught it. Right. Because a Rebbe teaches his Talmud how to live with the Torah. Correct. Right. He teaches him every part of Torah as well. And this is part of Torah. This is part of living. This is a part of the world. And a part of the world is a part of the Torah. And I think that also opens up what's inspiring for me. It opens up, it's meaningful for me because it opens up this world of using the world to further our Torah observance and further our relationship with God. And the things that Rebbe Hashem put in this world are meant for us to use. And not to be so afraid of those things. So on a more powerful level, person has a netiya, person has a drawing and drawn towards music and towards understanding music. Wonderful. What is it? I don't know what Jewish music is anyways, but what does it matter? That you're learning from the chachma and the wisdom of music from people who may not have observed all the halacha that you have. Who cares? There's a chachma to it, and you're understanding that chachma to further your relationship with God. It's incredible.
Why did God put music in the world?
To enhance the world. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful way of understanding.
That the beauty is there, but beauty is meant to be used in Alei Shem. It's
right, for what purpose? For Beis HaMikdash. That's why he created it. For Avodas HaLevim. But
Ruchnius. It's all created for Ruchnius.
There's beauty there that exists that we use for that is its sole purpose is for Ruchnius.
Its sole purpose is for Ruchnius.
But you don't have to look at it. I don't think you have to look at it and say music is beautiful because it is an expression of God. Don't try to find the expression of God within the music. God created music which is beautiful because it's pleasing.
It can be used for two things.
Correct.
You can either take it and denude it of its spirituality, denude it of its essential spirituality. It's always going to be spiritual. That's why you listen to secular music, to real music.
Are you saying not Eminem?
Not Eminem. No, Justin. No, but to listen.
That's chachma.
One of these guys just gave $100,000. I think it was Justin Bieber, just gave $100,000 to Atzala in Manchester. Nope, in Stanford Hill.
Okay.
He happened to have been in London. Somehow hopped onto this thing, and they pitched him. Give $100,000.
Irrelevant, but
it's just fun. But the point is that there are two.
You could listen. Whoever we find out what his name is, you can listen to his music.
Yeah,
he's endorsed.
There are two ways. There are two ways that music can be used. It can be used. It can be denuded, like I said, of its essential spiritual content, or it can maintain its spiritual content. But our relationship to it is because of its spiritual content. The value of music is because of its spiritual content.
But if music is good, and it's an expression of God, it is God, then there's no way that you can denude it of its spirituality because it is good. Good things cannot be misused.
No, you can.
Oh, no.
You have to look in deal with the pasuk.
Because Yafta Elikim.
When is it real yaft? When is it really beautiful?
Again, you're arguing, meaning, yes, I agree with you because there's two entities called Yafes and Shem. But if Yafes is also his beauty is only is God, that is God's expression of himself in is beauty, then it doesn't need to be separate. Then also Shem has the Yafes. The fact that it's two separate entities and it can be used for good and bad, just depending on its context, it shows that things in the world are not evil or not good. It's very hard to say something is good and bad. Is secular knowledge good or bad? Depends. If somebody looks at secular knowledge and tells you it is wrong, we're saying 100%. Yeah. We're just coming at it different ways. We're saying 100%. I'm agreeing with you. I'm sorry. I didn't mean I came off like I'm barking at your head. No, I'm agreeing with you that it has to be this way.
Right.
Because if anybody will tell you, I could use something as simple as this: secular music sung by a non-Jew is bad. I don't understand that sentence. Because first of all, you're making secular music into something incredible. that it can be good or bad. It cannot be good or bad. Oh, secular music was used in ways that I'm uncomfortable. It didn't express a relationship with God that I'm comfortable with, or did express.
It was filled with nivala, and it was filled with things that we shouldn't be associated with.
Right, that doesn't get put into your head through music. Well, great, I can accept that. I can accept that there's right and wrongs, but to take things that are not good or bad and to make them into good or bad, there could be right and wrong. Secular music, there are certain, like you mentioned, certain highly inappropriate ideas and concepts and words that get into your head through music. Maybe it's wrong. There's no need for it. It's wrong. But is it bad? Because once you make it bad, it's very hard. Then what is good?
It's not a good or bad thing.
Correct.
It's not a good or bad thing. But why is it here? It's here for ruchnis. If it fulfills that purpose, then we use good in terms of fulfilling its purpose. That's the word tov really means.
Right.
So is it good if it fulfills its purpose of expressing ruchnis in the world? If it doesn't, then it's bad. But that's my attraction and my curiosity about music has to be because it's a davar ruchni. It's not just that it's something that could be used for ruchnis. It is a davar. Its etzem is a davar ruchni. When it's not used as a davar ruchni, that's when we're destroying it. But what's the purpose of its existence is that it's a davar ruchni.
It's for me to come and elevate it, right?
And really, ultimately, all of Gashmis is meant to be looked at that way.
Right. We're picking up on music and knowledge and math, but everything is this way.
Everything. It's all a davar ruchni. The question is how sensitive I am to that, and how much I'm willing, because it's sometimes a little dangerous and a little bit of a slippery slope. So how much I'm willing to go there. And I think that this calls up also the whole secular knowledge and
right, for sure we touched on it, but for sure it touches upon that because we're opening a world which we now have to define a little bit. But
right, and again, you can approach things and master them, but it's all about ruchnius. It's not really about the gashmius shabo. Because this is a vehicle, something that we use in our avodas Hashem, and therefore I have to know about it. The guys in the Beis Hamikdash who used the instruments, they knew how to tune an instrument. They knew all the fine tunes part of the part, but they knew all the fine aspects of that. They knew voices. They knew how to control a voice, how to train a voice. They knew sound. They knew all of that. But it's not because they had secular knowledge, which they then applied to Torah, but that was Torah.
Right, it gets harder then because there was no formal education of secular knowledge, but we have it with the Hanukkah story. We have it with Yavan, right? What are you allowed to use from the Greek knowledge and from their really devoid of spirituality knowledge of life and Gashmias, and how do you apply it? That was really where that's the core of this whole issue sits there in the Hanukkah story with Yavan, because it wasn't a question of formal, not formal education. It was just a question of that knowledge. Can I use that knowledge or not? Right. Today we have an added element of formal education, which is its own argument, conversation, and more of a sociological conversation than a halachic conversation of what's the right way to build a community, what's the right way to see the next generation be driven by God and Torah. Those are more questions of it, and what goes into being in a formal secular education environment. And are those healthy for a God-fearing Jew? Lots of different questions. I would say more sociological and psychological than halachic.
But I just want to toss out into it, though, that you can do the same thing in two different ways.
Agreed.
And they become two different things. You have a certain Rebbe and a certain Rosh Yeshiva who went to secular college, who used them as the paradigms of secular, going to secular university and having secular knowledge, and they could be very, very different in their approach to it because they saw them as two different things. As you can see it as there's value in the knowledge itself, just in the knowledge, or that this knowledge is going to either help me with the parnasa, or it is going to help me then understand the Rebbeinu Shalom's world in a different kind of way. And those are two very different approaches. And I think that's bringing it back to Reb Chaim Ozer. I would dare say that was Reb Chaim Ozer's
approach to life,
sort of attraction to this. And that was why Reb Chaim Ozer was, the Kodesh Baruch Hu could put the idea in his head that he needed this information, but where Reb Chaim Ozer had an attraction to it, it's because this was understanding the Bria, and to understand the Bria is a beautiful thing.
Right.
I have a fascination. Mommy's got this program. She takes a picture of a flower and it tells you all about the flower. I have a fascination to know that kind of information. I'm always amazed at everything of people that know that information. I just have never had the drive or the time to really develop that. But my desire to know that is not because I think trees are cool and it's good to know what the trees are, but I would love to have that kind of relationship with the Rebbeinu Shalom's tree, that I know what it's called, I know what it does, I know the niflos habor. Those books
the ins and outs of it, and then you can really appreciate that yesh borei lebira, right? There's somebody who created this because it's insane. It cannot have happened on its own. When you really understand them, I find that with technology. When you understand how you look at a Tesla car, we see beautiful. Right. You look into it and you see like what goes into that and what creates it, what made it, what all the pieces and how it's different, how it differs from a car. And
you know that was Chachma that developed that, the Chachma that HaKodesh Baruch Hu gave people. So really ultimately it's coming from HaKodesh Baruch Hu. Right. I would say zero interest in technology.
Right.
Because my extension to the Bari Olam's world somehow doesn't make it to technology, but to flowers and to nature and to those things and how that works. That's where my curiosity lies, and that's another point I want to make about Chaim Ozer. It could very well be that this was Reb Chaim Ozer's netiyah. Now, why HaKodesh Baruch Hu gave him that netiyah? That's not for now, but it knows he had that netiyah, whereas another posek, another gadol would have a netiyah to something else, and some would not even recognize that netiyah. And it's just in their Torah, and that's not bad either. But they have a certain curiosity, but only within the small context of their Torah. So I think that though the bottom line of all this is that when it's about the Borei Olam's world, when it's about understanding the world we live in and recognizing that it's all Borei Olam, and I want to understand him better, and therefore I want to understand his world better, then that's an incredible thing.
Amazing. So I sort of turn to you guys, and I know put this in at the end, but if anybody's listening all the way to the end here at this, then on YouTube, I want you to send me a comment if you know of a story that everyone uses, a story of a gadol, a story of a person, hashgacha prata story that everybody uses for a certain nimshal, and everybody uses for a certain lesson that we learn out of it, that you look at and say, hey, it's teaching us something totally different. Because that's what I think sits here. And now you can look at stories and say that. So if you have a story like that, I would love to hear it, because I would love to know that I'm not alone on this, that a lot of the stories that people say, there's a story of blah. It's like, hey, there's something else hidden here. That would be really interesting to me.
So I learned early on when I started giving drush and things, you would look for stories. So they have these books that have stories in them and they categorize them.
Stories of faith, stories of...
And I would read those stories and say, why they put it in that category? It belongs in 5 other categories. It's not just there. And even with my own notes sometimes, where I would try to write on the top of my notes what was the main point of this. And some of those drushes I've used completely different, and not as side points that I tried to fetch into a drusha, but that that a main point from the drusha was completely different than what the standard understanding of it was. And as you looked at it and you said, "Oh, this is proving this," but no, it's really accentuating something else. I think that I think that most things are like that. They can be understood in many
ways.
contexts.
Yeah. Okay, shkach. Thank you very much. Thank you guys for listening, and
Pass the Chulent and the Yerushalmi
PTC and Yerushalmi Kugel.